Chapter 7 of Rewards and Fairies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kiki Bissell, Kikala.org. Rewards and Fairies by Rudyard Kipling. Section 7, Brother Squaretoes. Philadelphia. If you're off to Philadelphia in the morning, you mustn't take my stories for a guide. There's little left indeed of the city you will read of, and all the folk I write about have died. Now few will understand if you mention Talleyrand, or remember what his cunning and his skill did. And the cabmen at the wharf do not know Count Zinzendorf, nor the church in Philadelphia he builded. It is gone, gone, gone with lost Atlantis. Never say I didn't give you warning. In 1793 'twas there for all to see, but it's not in Philadelphia this morning. If you're off to Philadelphia in the morning, you mustn't go by everything I've said. Bob Bignell's southern stages have been laid aside for ages, but the limited will take you there instead. Toby Hurt can't be seen at 118 North 2nd Street no matter when you call. And I fear you'll search in vain for the wash-house down the lane where the Pharaoh played the fiddle at the ball. It is gone, gone, gone with Thebes the Golden. Never say I didn't give you warning. In 1794 'twas a famous dancing floor, but it's not in Philadelphia this morning. If you're off to Philadelphia in the morning, you must telegraph for rooms at some hotel. You needn't try your luck at Epley's or the Buck, though the father of his country liked them well. It is not the slightest use to inquire for Adam Goose, or to ask where Pastor Meter has removed. So you must treat as out of date the story I relate of the church in Philadelphia he loved so. He is gone, gone, gone with Martin Luther. Never say I didn't give you warning. In 1795 he was, rest his soul, alive, but he's not in Philadelphia this morning. If you're off to Philadelphia this morning, and wish to prove the truth of what I say, I pledge my word you'll find the pleasant land behind, unaltered since Red Jacket rode that way. Still the pine woods scent the noon, still the catbird sings his tune, still autumn sets the maple forest blazing. Still the grapevine through the dusk flings her soul-compelling musk, still the fireflies in the corn make night amazing. They are there, there, there with earth immortal. Citizens, I give you friendly warning. The things that truly last, when men and time have passed, they are all in Pennsylvania this morning. Brother Squaretoes. It was almost the end of their visit to the seaside. They had turned themselves out of doors while their trunks were being packed, and strolled over the downs toward the dull evening sea. The tide was dead low under the chalk cliffs, and the little wrinkled waves grieved along the sands up the coast to New Haven, and down the coast along Grey Brighton, whose smoke trailed out across the channel. They walked to the gap where the cliff is only a few feet high. A windlass for hoisting shingle from the beach below stands at the edge of it. The Coast Guard cottages are a little farther on, and an old ship's figurehead of a Turk in a turban stared at them over the wall. "This time tomorrow we shall be at home, thank goodness," said Una. "I hate the sea." "I believe it's all right in the middle," said Dan. "The edges are the sorrowful parts." Cordery, the Coast Guard, came out of the cottage, leveled his telescope at some fishing boats, shut it with a click, and walked away. He grew smaller and smaller along the edge of the cliff where the neat piles of white chalk every few yards show the path, even on the darkest night. "Where's Cordery going?" said Una. "Halfway to New Haven," said Dan. "Then he'll meet the New Haven Coast Guard and turn back. He says if Coast Guards were done away with, smuggling would start up at once." A voice on the beach under the cliff began to sing. The moon she shied on Telpscombe Tye, at night it was. She saw the smugglers riding by, a very pretty sight it was. Feet scrabbled on the flinty path. A dark, thin-faced man in very neat brown clothes and broad-toed shoes came up, followed by Puck. 3 Dunkirk boats was standing in, the man went on. Hush, said Puck. You'll shock these nice young people. Oh, shall I? Mille pardon. He shrugged his shoulders almost up to his ears, spread his hands abroad, and jabbered in French. No comprenez? He said. I'll give it to you in Low German. And he went off in another language, changing his voice and manner so completely that they hardly knew him for the same person. But his dark, beady brown eyes still twinkled merrily in his lean face, and the children felt that they did not suit the straight, plain, stuffy brown coat, brown knee breeches, and broad-brimmed hat. His hair was tied in a short pigtail which danced wickedly when he turned his head. Ha, done, said Puck, laughing. Be one thing or t'other, Pharaoh, French or English or German, no great odds which. Oh, but it is, though, said Una quickly. We haven't begun German yet, and we're going back to our French next week. Aren't you English? Said Dan. We heard you singing just now. Aha! That was the Sussex side of me. Dad, he married a French girl out of Bourgogne, and French she stayed till her dying day. She was an Aurette, of course. We Lees mostly marry Aurettes. Haven't you ever come across the saying, Aurettes and Lees like as 2 peas, what they can't smuggle they'll run overseas? Then you're a smuggler? Cried Una. And have you smuggled much? Said Dan. Mr. Lee nodded solemnly. Mind you, said he, I don't uphold smuggling for the generality of mankind. Mostly they can't make a do of it. But I was brought up to the trade, d'ye see, in a lawful line of descent on. He waved across the channel, on both sides of the water. 'Twas all the families, same as fiddlin'. The Aurettes used mostly to run the stuff across from Bourgogne, but we Lees landed it here and ran it up to London town by the safest road. Then where did you live? Said Una. You mustn't ever live too close to your business in the trade. We kept our little fishing shack at Shoreham, but otherwise we Lees was all honest cottager folk at Warminghurst under Washington, Bramber Bay, on the old Penn estate. Ah, said Puck, squatting by the windlass. I remember a piece about the Lees at Warminghurst, I do. There was never a Lee to Warminghurst that wasn't a gypsy last and first. I reckon that's the truth, Pharaoh. Pharaoh laughed. Admittin' that's true, he said, my gypsy blood must be wore pretty thin, for I've made and kept a worldly fortune. By smuggling? asked Dan. No, in the tobacco trade. You don't mean to say you gave up smuggling just to go and be a tobacconist? Dan looked so disappointed that they all had to laugh. I'm sorry, but there's all sorts of tobacconists, Pharaoh replied. How far out, now, would you call that smack with the patch on her foresail? He pointed to the fishing boats. A scant mile, said Puck, after a quick look. Just about. It's 7 fathom under her, clean sand. That was where Uncle Aurette used to sink his brandy kegs from Bourgogne, and we fished 'em up and rowed 'em into the gap, here for the ponies to run inland. One thickish night in January of '93, Dad and Uncle Lot and me came over from Shoreham in the smack. We found Uncle Aurette and the Lestranges, my cousins, waiting for us in their lugger with New Year's presents from mother's folk in Bourgogne. I remember Aunt Cecile, she'd send me a fine new reded cap, which I put on then and there, for the French was having their revolution in those days, and red caps was all the fashion. Uncle Aurette tells us that they had cut off their King Louis's head, and moreover, the Brest forts had fired on an English man-of-war. The news wasn't a week old. That means war again when we was only just getting used to the peace, says Dad. Why can't King George's men and King Louis's men do on their uniforms and fight it out over our heads? Me too, I wish that, says Uncle Aurette. But they'll be pressing better men than themselves to fight for 'em. The press gangs are already on our side. You look out for yours. I'll have to bide ashore and grow cabbages for a while, after I've run this cargo. But I do wish, Dad says, going over the lugger's side with our New Year's presents under his arm, and young Lestrange holding the lantern, I just do wish that those folk, which make war so easy, had to run one cargo a month all this winter. It'd show 'em what honest work means. Well, I've warned you, said Uncle Aurette. I'll be slipping off now before your revenue cutter comes. Give my love to sister and take care of the kegs. It's thickening to southward. I remember him waving to us and young Stephen Lestrange blowing out the lantern. By the time we'd fished up the kegs, the fog came down so thick, Dad judged it risky for me to row 'em ashore, even though we could hear the ponies stamping on the beach. So he and Uncle Lot took the dinghy and left me in the smack, playing on the fiddle to guide 'em back. Presently I heard guns. 2 of 'em sounded mighty like Uncle Aurette's 3-pounders. He didn't go naked about the seas after dark. Then come more, which I reckoned was Captain Giddens in the revenue cutter. He was open-handed with his compliments, but he would lay his guns himself. I stopped fiddling to listen, and I heard a whole skyful of French up in the fog, and Highbow come down on top of the smack. I hadn't time to call or think. I remember the smack heeling over, and me standing on the gunwale pushing against the ship's side as if I hoped to bear her off. Then the square of the open port, with a lantern in it, slid by in front of my nose. I kicked back on our gunwale as it went under and slipped through that port into the French ship, me and my fiddle. Gracious, said Una, what an adventure. Didn't anybody see you come in? Said Dan. There wasn't anyone there. I'd made use of an orlop deck port. That's the next deck below the gun deck, which by rights should not have been open at all. The crew was standing by their guns up above. I rolled on to a pile of dunnage in the dark, and I went to sleep. When I woke, men was talking all around me, telling each other their names and sorrows, just like Dad told me pressed men used to talk in the last war. Pretty soon I'd made out they'd all been above board together by the press gangs, and left to sort themselves. The ship, she was the Embuscade, a 36-gun Republican frigate. Captain Jean-Baptiste Bompard was 2 days out of Le Havre, going to the United States with a Republican French ambassador of the name of Genet. They had been up all night clearing for action on account of hearing guns in the fog. Uncle Aurette and Captain Giddens must have been passing the time of day with each other off New Haven, and the frigate had drifted past 'em. She never known she'd run down our smack. Seeing so many aboard was total strangers to each other. I thought one more mightn't be noticed. So I put on Aunt Cecile's red cap on the back of my head, and my hands in my pockets like the rest. And as we French say, I circulated until I found the galley. What? Here's one of 'em that isn't sick, says a cook. Take his breakfast to Citizen Bompard. I carried the tray to the captain, but I didn't call this Bompard citizen. Oh no. Mon Capitaine was my little word, same as Uncle Aurette used to answer in King Louis's navy. Bompard, he liked it. He took me on for captain servant, and after that no one asked questions, and thus I got good victuals and light work all the way across to America. He talked a heap of politics, and so did his officers, and when this Ambassador Genet got rid of his land stomach and laid down the law after dinner, a rook's parliament was nothing compared to their cabin. I learned to know most of the men which had worked in the French Revolution, through waiting at table and hearing talk about 'em. One of our forecastle 6-pounders was called Danon, and the other Marat. I used to play the fiddle between 'em, sitting on the capstan. Day in and day out, Bompard and Monsieur Genet talked of what France had done, and now the United States was going to join her to finish off the English in this war. Monsieur Genet said he'd just about make the United States fight for France. He was a rude common man, but I liked listening. I always helped drink any healths that was proposed, especially Citizen Danton's, who'd cut off King Louis's head, and all Englishmen might have been shocked, but that's where my French blood saved me. It didn't save me from getting a dose of ship's fever, though, the week before we put Monsieur Genet ashore at Charleston, and what was left of me after bleeding and pills took the dumb horrors from living 'tween decks. The surgeon, Kerrigan was his name, kept me down there to help him with his plasters. I was too weak to wait on Bompard. I don't remember much of any account for the next few weeks, till I smelled lilacs, and I looked out of the port, and we was moored to a wharf edge, and there was a town of fine gardens and red brick houses, all the green leaves of God's world waiting for me outside. "What's this?" I said to the sick bay man, old Pierre Thimpage he was. "Philadelphia," said Pierre. "You've missed it all. We're sailing next week." I just turned round and cried for longing to be amongst the laylocks. "If that's your trouble," says old Pierre, "you go straight ashore. None'll hinder you. They're all gone mad on these coasts, French and American together. 'Tisn't my notion of war." Pierre was an old King Louis man. My legs was pretty tottily, but I made shift to go on deck, which it was like a fair. The frigate was crowded with fine gentlemen and ladies pouring in and out. They sung and they waved French flags, while Captain Bompard and his officers, yes, some of the men, speechified to all and sundry about war with England. They shouted, "Down with England! Down with Washington! Hurrah for France and the Republic!" I couldn't make sense of it. I wanted to get out from that crunch of swords and petticoats and sit in a field. One of the gentlemen said to me, "Is that a genuine cap of liberty you're wearing?" 'Twas Aunt Cecile's red one, and pretty near wore out. "Oh yes," I says, "straight from France." "I'll give you a shilling for it," he says, and with that money in my hand and my fiddle under my arm, I squeezed past the entry port and went ashore. It was like a dream. Meadows, trees, flowers, birds, houses, and people all different. I sat me down in a meadow and fiddled a bit, and then I went in and out of the streets, looking and smelling and touching, like a little dog at a fair. Fine folks was sitting on a white stone doorstep of their houses, and a girl threw me a handful of laylock sprays, and when I said merci without thinking, she said she loved the French. They all was the fashion in the city. I saw more tricolor flags in Philadelphia than I'd ever seen in Bourgogne, and everyone was shouting for war with England. A crowd of folks was cheering after our French ambassador, that same Monsieur Genet, which we'd left at Charleston. He was a horseback behaving as if the place belonged to him, and commanding all and sundry to fight the British. But I'd heard that before. I got into a long straight street as wide as the Broyal, where gentlemen was racing horses. I'm fond of horses. Nobody hindered 'em, and a man told me it was called Race Street of that purpose. When I followed some black niggers which I had never seen close before, but I left them to run after a great proud copper-faced man with feathers in his hair and a red blanket trailing behind him. A man told me he was a real Red Indian called Red Jacket, and I followed him into an alleyway off Race Street by 2nd Street, where there was a fiddle playing. I'm fond of fiddling. The Indian stopped at the baker's shop, Conrad Gerhard's it was, and bought some sugary cakes. Hearing what the price was, I was going to have some too, but the Indian asked me in English if I was hungry. "Oh yes," I says. I must have looked a sore scrattel. He opens a door on the staircase and leads the way up. We walked into a dirty little room full of flutes and fiddles, and a fat man fiddling by the window in a smell of cheese and medicines fit to knock you down. I was knocked down too, for the fat man jumped up and hit me a smack in the face. I fell against the old spinet covered with pill boxes, and the pills rolled about on the floor. The Indian never moved an eyelid. "Pick up the pills! Pick up the pills!" the fat man screeches. I started picking 'em up, hundreds of 'em, meaning to run out under the Indian's arm, but I came on giddy all over and I sat down. The fat man went back to his fiddling. "Toby," says the Indian after a while, "I brought the boy to be fed, not hit." "What?" says Toby. "I thought it was Gert Squantfelder." He put down his fiddle and took a look at me. "Himmel," he says, "I've hit the wrong boy. It's not the new boy. Why are you not the new boy? Why are you not Gert Squantfelder?" "I don't know," I said. "The gentleman in the pink blanket brought me." Says the Indian, He's hungry, Toby. Christians always feed the hungry, so I bring him." "You should have said that first," said Toby. He pushed plates at me, and the Indian put bread and pork on them, and a glass of Madeira wine. I told him I was off the French ship, which I had joined on account of my mother being French. That was true enough when you think of it, and besides, I saw that the French was all the fashion in Philadelphia. Toby and the Indian whispered, and I went on picking up the pills. "You like pills, eh?" says Toby. "No," I says. "I've seen our ship's doctor roll too many of 'em." "Ho," he says, and shoves 2 bottles at me. "What's those?" "Calomel," I says. "The other's senna." "Right," he says. 1 week I have tried to teach Gert Squanfelder the difference between them, yet he cannot tell. "You like to fiddle?" he says. He'd just seen my kit on the floor. "Oh, yes," says I. "Oho," he says. "What note is this?" drawing his boat across. He meant it for an A, so I told him it was. "My brother," he says to the Indian, "I think this is the hand of Providence. I warned that Gert, if he went to play upon the wharves any more, he would hear it from me. Now look at this boy and say what you think." The Indian looked me over whole minutes. There was a musical clock on the wall, and dolls came out and hopped while the hour struck. He looked me over all the while they did it. "Good," he says at last. "This boy is good." "Good then," says Toby. "Now I shall play my fiddle, and you shall sing your hymn, brother. Boy, go down to the bakery and tell them you are young Gert Squanfelder that was. The horses are in Davy Jones's locker. If you ask any questions, you shall hear from me." I left him singing hymns, and I went down to old Conrad Gerhard. He wasn't at all surprised when I told him I was young Gert Squanfelder that was. He knew Toby. His wife, she walked me into the backyard without a word, and she washed me, and she cut my hair to the edge of a basin, and she put me to bed, and oh, how I slept! How I slept in that little room behind the oven looking on the flower garden. I didn't know Toby went to the Embuscade that night and bought me off Dr. Kerrigan for $12 and a dozen bottles of Seneca oil. Kerrigan wanted new lace on his coat, and he reckoned I hadn't long to live, so he put me down as discharged sick. "I like Toby," said Una. "Who was he?" said Puck. "Apothecary Tobias Hurt," Farah replied. 118 2nd Street. The famous Seneca oil man that lived half of every year among the Indians. He let me tell my tale my own way, same as his brown mare used to go to Lebanon. "Then why did he keep her in Davy Jones's locker?" Dan asked. "That was his joke. He kept her under David Jones's hat shop in the Buck Tavern yard, and his Indian friends kept their ponies there when they visited him. I looked after the horses when I wasn't rolling pills on top of the old spinet, while he played his fiddle and Red Jacket sang hymns. I liked it. I had good victuals, light work, a suit of clean clothes, a plenty of music, and quiet, smiling German folk all around that let me sit in their gardens. My first Sunday, Toby took me to his church in Mortavan Alley. That was in the garden too. The women wore long-eared caps and handkerchiefs. They came in at one door and the men at another, and there was a brass chandler so you could see your face in, and a nigger boy to blow the organ bellows. I carried Toby's fiddle, and he played pretty much as he chose, all against the organ and the singing. He was the only one they let do it, for they was a simple-minded folk. They used to wash each other's feet in the attic to keep themselves humble, which Lord knows they didn't need. "How very queer," said Una. Pharaoh's eyes twinkled. "I've met many and seen much," he said, "but I haven't yet found any better or quieter or forbearinger people than the brethren and sistren of the Moravian Church in Philadelphia. Nor will I ever forget my first Sunday. The service was in English that week, with the smell of the flowers coming in from Pastor Meter's garden where the big peach tree is, and me looking at all the clean strangeness and thinking of tween decks on the Embuscade only 6 days ago. Being a boy, it seemed to me it had lasted forever and was going on forever. But I didn't know Toby then, and as soon as the dancing clock struck midnight that Sunday, I was lying under the spinet. I heard Toby's fiddle. He'd just done his supper, which he always took late and heavy. "Gert," says he, "get the horses. Liberty and independence forever." The flowers appear upon the earth, and the time of the singing birds is come. We are going to my country seat in Lebanon. I rubbed my eyes and fetched him out of the buck stables. Red Jacket was there saddling his, and when I'd packed the saddlebags we three rode up Brace Street to the ferry by starlight. So we went traveling. It's a kindly, softly country there, back of Philadelphia, among the German towns, Lancaster way. Little houses and bursting big barns, fat cattle, fat women, and all as peaceful as heaven might be if they farmed there. Toby sold medicines out of his saddlebags and gave the French war news to folk along the roads. Him and his long-hilted umbrella was as well known as the stagecoaches. He took orders for that famous Seneca oil, which he had the secret of from Red Jacket's Indians, and he slept in friends' farmhouses, but he would shut all the windows, so Red Jacket and me slept outside. There's nothing to hurt except snakes, and they slip away quick enough if you thrash in the bushes. I'd have liked that, said Dan. I'd no fault to find with those days. In the cool of the morning the catbird sings. He's something to listen to. And there's a smell of wild grapevine growing in damp hollows, which you drop into, after long rides in the heat, which is beyond compare for sweetness. So the puffs out of the pine woods of afternoons. Come sundown, the frogs strike up, and later in the fireflies dance in the corn. Oh me, the fireflies in the corn. We were a week or 10 days on the road, tacking from one place to another, such as Lancaster, Bethlehem, Ephrata. Though Bethlehem and Ephrata. No odds, I loved going about. And so we jogged into dozy little Lebanon by the Blue Mountains, where Toby had a cottage and a garden of all fruits. He came north every year for this wonderful Seneca oil. The Seneca Indians made it for him. They'd never sell to anyone else, and he doctored him with von Swieten pills, which they valued more than their own oil. He could do what he chose with them, and of course he tried to make them Moravans. The Senecas are a seemly, quiet people, and they'd had trouble enough from white men, American and English, during the wars, to keep 'em in that walk. They lived on a reservation by themselves, way off by their lake. Toby took me up there, and they treated me as if I was their own blood brother. Red Jacket said the mark of my bare feet in the dust was just like an Indian's, and my style of walking was similar. I know I took to their ways all over. Maybe the gypsy drop in your blood helped you, said Puck. Sometimes I think it did, Pharaoh went on. Anyhow, Red Jacket and the corn planter, the other Seneca chief, they let me be adopted into the tribe. It's only a compliment, of course, but Toby was angry when I showed up with my white face painted. They gave me a side name which means 2 tongues, because, do you see, I talked French and English. They had their own opinions, I've heard 'em, about the French and the English and the Americans. They'd suffered from all of 'em during the wars, and they'd only wished to be left alone. But they thought a heap of the President of the United States. Cornplanter had had dealings with him, and in some French wars out west when General Washington was only a lad. His being president afterwards made no odds to him. They always called him Big Hand, for he was a large-fisted man, and he was all of their notion of a white chief. Cornplanter'd sweep his blanket around him, and after I'd filled his pipe he'd begin, "In the old days, long ago, when braves were many and blankets were few," Big Hand said. If Red Jacket agreed to the say-so, he'd trickle a little smoke out of the corners of his mouth. If he didn't, he'd blow through his nostrils. Then Cornplanter'd stop, and Red Jacket'd take on. Red Jacket was the better talker of the two. I've laid and listened to him for hours. Oh, they knew General Washington well. Cornplanter used to meet him at Epley's, the great dancing place in the city before District Marshal William Nichols bought it. They told me he was always glad to see him, and he'd hear 'em out to the end if they had anything on their minds. They had a good deal in those days. I came at it by degrees after I was adopted into the tribe. The talk up in Lebanon and everywhere else that summer was about the French war with England, and whether the United States would join in with France or make peace treaty with England. Toby wanted peace so as he could go about the reservation buying his oils, but most of the white men wished for war, and they was angry because the president wouldn't give the sign for it. The newspaper said men was burning Guy Fawkes images of General Washington and yelling after him in the streets of Philadelphia. You'd have been astonished what those two fine old chiefs knew of the ins and outs of such matters. The little I've learned of politics I picked up from Cornplanter and Red Jacket on the reservation. Toby used to read the Aurora newspaper. He was what they call a Democrat, though our church is against the brethren considering themselves with politics. I hate politics too, said Una, and Pharaoh laughed. I might have guessed it, he said. There's something that isn't politics. One hot evening, late in August, Toby was reading the newspaper on the stoop, and Red Jacket was smoking under a peach tree, and I was fiddling. Of a sudden, Toby drops his Aurora. I'm an oldish man, too fond of my own comforts, he says. I will go to the church, which is in Philadelphia. My brother, lend me a spare pony. I must be there tonight. Good, says Red Jacket, looking at the sun. My brother shall be there. I will ride with him and bring back the ponies. I went to pack the saddlebags. Toby had cured me of asking questions. He stopped my fiddling if I did. Besides, Indians don't ask questions much, and I wanted to be like them. When the horses were ready, I jumped up. Get off, says Toby. Stay and mind the cottage till I come back. The Lord has laid this on me, not you. I wish he hadn't. He powders off down the Lancaster road, and I sat on the doorstep wondering after him. When I picked up the paper to wrap his fiddle strings in, I spelled out a piece about the yellow fever being in Philadelphia. So dreadful, everyone was running away. I was scared, for I was fond of Toby. We never said much to each other, but we fiddled together, and music's as good as talking to them that understand. Did Toby die of yellow fever? Una asked. Not him. There's justice left in the world still. He went down to the city and bled him well again in heaps. He sent back word by Red Jacket that, if there was a war he died, I was to bring the oils along to the city. But till then I was to go on working in the garden, and Red Jacket was to see me to it. Down at heart all Indians reckon digging's a squaw's business, and neither him nor Cornplanter, when he relieved to watch, was a hard taskmaster. We hired a nigger boy to do our work, and a lazy, grinning runagate he was. When I found Toby didn't die the minute he reached town, why, boy-like, I took him off my mind and went with my Indians again. Oh, those days up in north at Castanego, running races and gambling with the Senecas, or bee-hunting in the woods, or fishing in the lake. Pharaoh sighed and looked after across the water. But it's best, he went on suddenly, after the first frosts. You roll out of your blanket and find every leaf left green overnight turned red and yellow. Not by trees at that time, but hundreds and hundreds of miles of 'em, like sunsets splattered upside down. On one of such days the maples was flaming scarlet and gold, and the sumach bushes were redder. Cornplanter and Red Jacket came out in full war dress, making the very leaves look silly. Feathered war bonnets, yellow doeskin leggings, fringed and tasseled, red horse blankets, and their bridles feathered and shelled and beaded no bounds. I thought it was war against the British till I saw their faces weren't painted, and they only carried wrist whips. I then hummed Yankee Doodle at 'em. They told me they was going to visit Big Hand and find out for sure whether he meant to join the French in fighting the English, or to make a peace treaty with England. I reckon those two would have gone out on their warpath at a nod from Big Hand, but they knew well, if there was a war twixt England and the United States, their tribe would catch it from both parties, same as all the other wars. They asked me to come along and hold the ponies. That puzzled me, because they always put their ponies up at the Buck, or Epley's, when they went to General Washington in the city, and horse-holding is a nigger's job. Besides, I wasn't exactly dressed for it. Do you mean you were dressed like an Indian? Dan demanded. Pharaoh looked a little abashed. This didn't happen at Lebanon, he said, but a bit farther north on the reservation. And at that particular moment in time, so far as blanket, hairband, moccasins, and sunburn went, there wasn't much odds twixt me and a young Seneca buck. You may laugh, he smoothed down his long-skirted brown coat, But I told you I took to their ways all over. I said nothing, though I was bursting to let out the war whoop like young men had taught me. No, and you don't let one out here either, said Puck before Dan could ask. Go on, Brother Square-Toes. We went on. Pharaoh's narrow dark eyes gleamed and danced. We went on, 40, 50 miles in a day, for days on end, we three braves. And how a great tall Indian a horseback can carry his war bonnet at a center through thick timber without brushing a feather beats me. My silly head was banged often enough by low branches, but they slipped through like running elk. We had evening hymn singing every night after they'd blown their pipe smoke to the quarters of heaven. Where did we go? I'll tell you, but don't blame me if you're no wiser. We took the old war trail from the end of the lake along the East Susquehanna through the Nantago country, right down to Fort Shamokin on the Cinconays River. We crossed the Juanita by Fort Granville, got into Shippensburg over the hills of the Oshwick Trail, and then to Williams Ferry. It's a bad one. From Williams Ferry across the Shandor, over the Blue Mountains, through Ashby's Gap, and so southeast by south, from there till we found the President at the back of his own plantations. I'd hate to be trailed by Indians in earnest. They caught him like a partridge on a stump. After we'd left our ponies, we scouted forward through a woody piece, and creeping slower and slower, at last if my moccasins even slipped Red Jacket to turn and frown. I heard voices, Monsieur Genet's for choice, long before I saw anything, and we pulled up at the edge of a clearing where some niggers in a gray and red liveries were holding horses and half a dozen gentlemen, but one was Genet. We were talking among felled timber. I fancied they'd come to see Genet on a piece of his road, for his portmantle was with him. I hid in between two logs, as near the company as I be to that old windlass there. I didn't need anybody to show me Big Hand. He stood up, very still, his legs a little apart, listening to Genet, that French ambassador, which never had more manners than a Beauchamp tinker. Genet was as good as ordering him to declare war on England at once. I had heard that clack before on the embuscade. He'd said he'd stir up the whole United States to have war with England, whether Big Hand liked it or not. Big Hand heard him out of the last end. I looked behind me. My two chiefs had vanished like smoke. Says Big Hand, "That's very forcibly put, Monsieur Genet." "Citizen, citizen," the fellow spits in. "I at least am a Republican." "Citizen Genet," he says, "you may be sure it will receive my fullest consideration." This seemed to take Citizen Genet back a piece. He rode off grumbling and never gave his nigger a penny. No gentleman. The others all assembled around Big Hand then, and in their way, they said pretty much what Genet had said. They put it to him, here was France and England at war, in a manner of speaking, right across the United States stomach, and paying no regards to anyone. The French was searching American ships on pretense they was helping England, but really to steal the goods. The English was doing the same, only the other way around, and besides searching, they was pressing American citizens into their navy to help them fight France, on pretense that those Americans was lawful British subjects. His gentlemen put this very clear to Big Hand. It didn't look to them, they said, as though the United States should try to keep out of the fight was any advantage to her, because she only catched it from both French and English. They said that 9 out of 10 good Americans was crazy to fight the English, then and there. They wouldn't say whether that was right or wrong. They only wanted Big Hand to turn it over in his mind. He did, for a while. I saw Red Jacket and Cornplanter watching him from the far side of the clearing, and how they had slipped round there was another mystery. Then Big Hand drew himself up, and let his gentleman have it. "Hit him?" asked Dan. "No, nor yet was it what you might call swearing. He blasted him with his natural speak. He asked them half a dozen times over whether the United States had enough armed ships for any shape or sort of war with anyone. He asked them if they thought she had those ships, to give him those ships, and they looked on ground as if they expected to find him there. He put it to 'em whether, setting ships aside, their country, I reckon he gave 'em good reasons. Whether the United States was ready or able to face a new big war, she having but so few years back wound up one against England, and being all holds full of her own troubles. As I said, the strong way he laid it to 'em all before 'em blasted 'em, and when he'd done it he was like a still in the woods after a storm. A little man, but they all looked little, pipes up like a young rook in a blowed-down nest. Nevertheless, General, it seems you will be compelled to fight England. Quick, Big Hand wheeled on him. And is there anything in my past which makes you think I am averse to fighting Great Britain? Everybody laughed except him. Oh, General, you mistake us entirely, they says. I trust so, he says. But I know my duty. We must have peace with England. At any price? Says the man with the rook's voice. At any price, says he, word by word. Our ships will be searched, our citizens will be pressed, but... Then what about the Declaration of Independence, says one. Deal with facts, not fantasy, says Big Hand. The United States are in no position to fight England. But think of public opinion, another one starts up. The feeling in Philadelphia alone is at fever heat. He held up one of his big hands. Gentlemen, he says. Slow he spoke, but his voice carried far. I have to think of our country. Let me assure you that the treaty with Great Britain will be made, though every city in the Union burn me in effigy. At any price? The actor-like chap keens on croaking. The treaty must be made on Great Britain's own terms. What else can I do? He turns his back on him, and they looked at each other and slinked off to the horses, leaving him alone. And then I saw he was an old man. Then Red Jacket and Cornplanter rode down the clearing from the far end as though they had just chanced along. Back went Big Hand's shoulders, up went his head, and he stepped forward one single pace with a great deep hoe. So pleased he was. It was a stalified meeting to behold. 3 big men, and 2 of them looking like jeweled images among the spattle of gray-colored leaves. I saw my chief's war bonnets sinking together down and down. They made the sign which no Indian makes outside of the medicine lodges, a sweep of the right hand just clear of the dust, and an in-bend of the left knee at the same time, and those proud eagle feathers almost touched his boot top. What did it mean? Said Dan. Mean? Cried Pharaoh. Why, it's it's the Sackham's way of sprinkling the sacred cornmeal in front of... Oh, it's a piece of Indian compliment, really, and it signifies that you are a very big chief. Big Hand looked down on him. First he says quite softly, My brothers know it is not easy to be a chief. Then his voice grew. My children, he says, what is in your minds? Says Cornplanter, we came to ask whether there will be a war with King George's men, but we have heard what our father has said to his chiefs. We will carry away that talk in our hearts to tell to our people. No, says Big Hand, leave all that talk behind. It was between white men only. But take this message from me to your people. There will be no war. His gentlemen were waiting, so they didn't delay him. Only Cornplanter says, using his old side name, Big Hand, did you see us among the timber just now? Surely, says he. You taught me to look behind trees when we were both young. And with that he cantered off. Neither of my chiefs spoke till we were back on our ponies again and half an hour along the home trail. When Cornplanter says to Red Jacket, we will have the corn dance this year. There will be no war. And that was all there was to it. Pharaoh stood up as though he had finished. Yes, said Puck, rising too, and what came out of it in the long run? Let me get at my story my own way, was the answer. Look, it's later than I thought. That Shoreham smack's thinking of her supper. The children looked across the darkening channel. A smack had hoisted the lantern and slowly moved west where Brighton pier lights ran out in a twinkling line. When they turned round, the gap was empty behind them. I expect they've packed our trunks by now, said Dan. This time tomorrow we'll be home. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster, and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can keep to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make you trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken, and stoop to build 'em up with worn-out tools. If you can make one heap of all your winnings, and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that is in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. End of chapter.